Welcome to the OK Not OK podcast. I am the SportsZu, and today we are comparing and contrasting the two types of Elimination Chamber matches, number one contender matches versus championship matches. So all four Elimination Chamber matches over the last 2 years will be number one contender matches. Is this better, or should we go back to championship matches? We're going to break all that down now with the stats, talk about some of the specific matches, and then finally give you a verdict. So let's get right onto it and start with the history of the Elimination Chamber. The very first chamber match was on November 17th, 2002 at Survivor Series, where the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, won the first ever Elimination Chamber and the World Heavyweight Championship by defeating Rob Van Dam, Booker T, Kane, Chris Jericho, and the then champion Triple H. And including that first match, the first 5 Elimination Chamber matches were for either the World Heavyweight Championship, the WWE Championship, or even the ECW Championship. But after those 5 Elimination Chamber matches, we moved to No Way Out, which happened on February 17th, 2008, and that would become the Chamber's standard home, which is usually as the last premium live event, or under its prior name, pay-per-view, right before WrestleMania. As such, the Chamber matches provide a major stake to either be a title match or a number one contenders match. And we have now had 34 Elimination Chamber matches, which will soon be 36, and every single one of them have been either for a championship or a number one contender spot, in which they're broken down with 23 of the 34 for championships and 11 of 34 for number one contender spots. So let's talk about that 2008 No Way Out Chamber. It was the first time where we had 2 chamber matches in one night. Now that has become pretty much the norm, and if you count this year's upcoming Elimination Chamber, that will mean 14 of the last 17 years we will have 2 chamber matches. And we'll also note that in 2008, it was also the first time that both matches were for that number one contender spot instead of for the title. There we had The Undertaker become the number one contender for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 24, where he of course kept the streak alive by defeating Edge, and then Triple H became the number one contender for the WWE title, and he went on to lose to both John Cena and Randy Orton, who the latter of which was the champion at the time. After 2009's No Way Out, the Elimination Chamber then became its own PLE in 2010, and there has been an Elimination Chamber PLE each year except for 1 year, and that happened to be in the 2016 calendar year. But if you think about years into WWE, where the Raw after WrestleMania starts a new year and then WrestleMania ends the year without an Elimination Chamber was the 2014-15 WWE year that ended with WrestleMania 31. The Chamber did return for the 15-16 WWE year, but it was held just 2 months after WrestleMania 31 on May 31st, 2015, which means we then had to wait 20.5 months for the next one when it was restored to its normal February spot, which it has remained ever since, except it did sneak into March one time in 2020, and coincidentally enough, it will be on March 1st this year. But since it moved back to February, there have been 4 occasions when it was not the last PLE before Mania, but 2 of those were when we had the brand-specific PLEs in 2017 and 18, so those were the last PLE before WrestleMania for that specific brand. Now, in the other 2 years, which were 2019 and 2021, we had a fast lane PLE between the Chamber and WrestleMania. So let's switch on over from the basic history over to the statistics, which are more important for our purposes. As I stated earlier, 23 of the 34 matches so far have been for championships, with the IC title, the US title, the women's tag title, and the women's world title one time each. And the very first women's chamber match was indeed for the Raw women's title in 2018, and then the women's tag team match was actually to crown the inaugural winners, which happened to be the Boss and Hug Connection in 2019. Now for men's tag teams, we've had 2 of those matches, but all of the rest have been for men's world championships. If we break down those 34 matches in another way, of those 23 championship matches, a new champion has been crowned 11 times, while the champion has retained 12 times. But of those 11 new champions, 3 of them were from vacant titles, such that there was no incumbent to retain them, so that wasn't even an option. But more importantly, 7 of the first 9 Elimination Chamber championship matches had new champions. But since then, in only 4 of the last 14 championship chamber matches have new champions been crowned. But of those 4, 2 of them were of those vacant titles, and the most recent of those 4 was in 2022, when Bobby Lashley actually had a legitimate shoulder injury that he suffered at the Royal Rumble. So, with it being possible that he would be out for 4 months and have to miss WrestleMania, they had to find a way to get that title off of him. But fortunately for him, he did return in time for WrestleMania to defeat Omos. But in the match itself, Seth Rollins buckle-bombed Austin Theory through Lashley's pod. That caused Lashley to hit his head up against the pod and suffer a concussion, so he exited the match without even participating. And then, of course, Brock Lesnar went on to win that match. But if we exclude that match with Lashley and those 2 vacant titles, well, that means we've only had 1 time since 2011 that the champion has lost inside the chamber. That's 1 out of 10, 10%. And what was that one? That was in 2017 when Bray Wyatt defeated John Cena to become WWE Champion, but then he horribly lost to Randy Orton at WrestleMania, and Cena went on to team up with Nikki Bella to defeat The Miz and Maurice, and that led to Cena proposing to Nikki, so of course the rest is, well, we know the rest there. Let's not get into that any further. And unfortunately, that is the only WrestleMania that I have been to. And in addition to those 2 disappointments at the end of the day, I also thought I was seeing The Undertaker's last match. But nope, that was obviously not the case. So just great for that to be my 1 WrestleMania experience so far. But let's get back on track, because even if you include Bobby Lashley here, that means there have just been 2 out of 11 championship matches, or 18.18% of the time in which the champion has lost. Now, theoretically, if it were a fair match, the champion should retain only 1/6 of the time, which is a mere 16.67%, which I think leads to what we would call an absurd result, because the champion should win 17% of the time, but they're actually winning 82% of the time. So all we can ask for is that the result not be a near certainty going into the match. But unfortunately, that's exactly what it has been. And why is that? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, with the timing of the chamber typically being the last PLE, you simply have to have the correct champion by this point in the WWE calendar. And number 2, it is not ideal if the champion has no title defenses going into WrestleMania, so then that person doesn't look like a strong champion, having just won that 1 match, which was not even a one-on-one match going into WrestleMania. So let's go into that a little bit with an example, and we'll talk about Bray Wyatt in 2017. Well, he did have to immediately defend his title against both John Cena and AJ Styles on the very next SmackDown, but then he went on to lose at WrestleMania against Randy Orton. And when you might have thought that was going to be the start of a long reign, well, it just ended abruptly and ended up being pretty worthless. Conversely, let's talk about the 2012 Elimination Chamber, because there CM Punk retained his WWE Championship that he had just won a few months before at Survivor Series in 2011. Now, that just ended up being the start of his very long 434-day reign, in which he eventually lost to The Rock at the Royal Rumble in 2013. But when he went into WrestleMania 28, just after the Elimination Chamber, he at least could say that he had won 3 PLE title defenses up to that point, so he at least looked like a stronger champion when he ultimately went on to defeat Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 28. So let's switch on over to the number 1 contender matches, and as I stated, 11 of the 34 chamber matches to this point have been number 1 contender matches, and they've leaned into this much more recently with 6 of the last 10 chamber matches being these number 1 contender matches. And if you count this year's upcoming matches, that will make 8 out of the last 12. And if you count this year's upcoming matches, that will be 8 out of the last 12 and 5 of the last 6. So let's talk about the benefits of this type of match. Now, number 1, theoretically, you have more uncertainty with each of the participants having that true 17% chance to win. Now, of course, what is theoretical in the WWE might not actually be those exact odds. And in fact, when you look at the betting odds, the favorites have been winning most of the time. Well, let's go backwards to talk about that a little bit, because last year's not a very good example. They pretty much gave away that Becky Lynch was going to face Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania, because if you can remember, at the kickoff show in Vegas, even though that happened before the chamber, those two got into a bit of a stare down and shouting match. And then on the men's side, with Seth Rollins already injured and still being on the Raw roster, there was certainly some possibility that Randy Orton could win that one, but McIntyre deservedly was a pretty big favorite there, so both he and Becky were minus 2,000 favorites, which is about a 95% implied probability. If we go back 1 year, on the women's side, Asuka was a pretty big favorite as well. She was at minus 1250, and she did indeed win that match where she went on to lose to Bianca. But in 2022, it was a bit different because Bianca was only a minus 200 favorite, whereas Alexa was at plus 200 and Rhea was at plus 300. So pretty good all around there, with 3 people having a pretty good shot. Now, of course, Bianca did go on to win that one, so she could get her revenge against Becky. Now let's talk about this year. Yes, the WWE is doing a great job of stacking the match with many of the top stars here. So for the men, it is easy to think that Cena will win to get his shot at championship number 17 to break that record. But of course, CM Punk still needs his main event of WrestleMania, and we can never really count out Drew McIntyre or Seth Rollins as well. And I guess maybe you probably can't count out Damian Priest this year, but it is good to get him in the match since he did just win the World Heavyweight Championship last year at WrestleMania. Now on the women's side, both Liv and Bianca seem like very strong choices to win it this year. And of course, you can't really count out Bayley either, since she is on Raw and she won the title last year at WrestleMania. But admittedly, it probably is too soon for Alexa and the others this time around. And reason number 2 why these are the better type of matches is that you do have to earn your victory rather than be a hand-picked competitor. Now, if we talk about in storylines, well, after you lose the Rumble, this does give you your last and only shot to get to WrestleMania in a championship match. So it makes sense that you have to go through a brutal match against several top opponents to get that title shot at WrestleMania. Otherwise, it's just whoever happens to be feuding with the champion at the right time of the year. And no, they can't all be blood feuds, but since we do generally have about a month and a half from the Elimination Chamber to WrestleMania, that does give the competitors plenty of time to tell a good story, and so we get a meaningful championship match. But we have to admit it's not all positive here, because unfortunately that means there's plenty of time to kill for the champion to get from the Royal Rumble all the way until WrestleMania. So let's think about what we have here this year. Jey Uso will have 10 weeks of pain now, but Gunther has no important matches all the way from Saturday night's main event until WrestleMania. So he's pretty much just killing time and probably also killing Jey each and every week. Now on the women's side, Tiffany Stratton will be in a meaningless match with Trish Stratus at Elimination Chamber taking on Nia and Candice. But that just means that neither Tiffy nor Charlotte have much going on, and they're just biding their time until WrestleMania. Now for the non-Rumble winners, who knows what Cody Rhodes will be doing? He's just kind of wasting time to see who's going to win that chamber match, and then he will be facing whoever wins inside the chamber. But is he just going to sit out the Elimination Chamber? He doesn't usually miss PLEs, but there's not much for him to do right now. And of course, with Rhea Ripley's title match with Io 2 days after the Elimination Chamber, it's a little bit strange that the challenger will actually be known before the champion. So yeah, it's really a weird route for everybody to go through for all of this time. So I guess I'd have to say it's a tough one for you, Toronto. You don't have any WWE or World title matches that are going to be on your card. But in the end, we've got to make a call on what is better, the championship matches or the #1 contender matches. But since they don't like to make those late title changes and it makes the champion look less strong if you do make that kind of a change, it's an easy choice here. Switching to these #1 contender matches is by far better than having championship matches inside the chamber themselves. Because, as I said, we need to keep that air of uncertainty, which keeps that excitement level up for these chamber matches. And since the chamber matches are always hard-hitting and pretty exciting, it's really a great way to have several different match possibilities on the road to WrestleMania. Now, speaking of uncertainties, you just never know what the Doc is going to be up to, so make sure to go on over here and check out his latest set of grades if you haven't done that yet. But at least I will be looking forward to both of these upcoming Chamber #1 contender matches. But until then, I'm the SportsZu, and this has been the OK Not OK podcast.